This small table, standing meekly before me, is but a pale pretence of a proper work surface, a feeble facade that trembles under the mere thought of labour. It is wobbly, it is weak, and it is altogether too light to shoulder the weight of any substantial task. The beams, resting on trestles nearby, though heavy and broad, share this table's instability, swaying with the same uncertain rhythm. So, let us embark on the journey of creation to build a workbench, a bastion of stability and strength, a surface worthy of the work it will bear. The genesis of this project lies not in the wood itself, but in the mind's eye, where the first lines are drawn in the imagination before they ever touch paper. As is my custom, I begin with a drawing, an isometric perspective that grants depth and dimension to the vision taking shape in my thoughts. The act of drawing the end product is more than mere design. It is a mental process, a rehearsal of the build, where each line traced on the page is a precursor to the physical form it will take in wood. This drawing is not merely a plan for an object, but a map for the journey ahead, guiding every operation I must perform to bring this creation into existence. Each stroke of the pencil is deliberate, each line a thread in the tapestry of the finished piece. I am not simply designing an object, I am choreographing a dance of saws and chisels, of planes and shapers, orchestrating the order of operations that is crucial to the success of any build. For in the world of woodworking, the sequence of steps is the silent architect behind every structure. A well-ordered process is the key to efficiency, making the work not just easier, but exponentially faster. When the sequence is solid, the work flows smoothly, allowing me to measure thrice and cut once, avoiding the missteps that can turn a masterpiece into mere scrap. With the plan firmly in hand, I begin by sketching the skeleton of the structure, a framework of lines drawn with the fine lead of a mechanical pencil. This skeletal drawing serves as the underlying blueprint, the unseen structure that supports the final form. Once I am satisfied with the framework, I switch to ink, tracing over the lines with a steady hand to solidify the vision. The ink adds permanence and clarity, allowing me to grasp the final result more firmly in my mind. Content with the drawing, I consider the work-holding add-ons that will eventually adorn this bench, a detail to be pondered later when the structure itself is complete. For now, the task at hand is to bring the beams to their proper dimensions. I start with the stiles, the vertical supports that will give the bench its height and stability, and then move on to the rails, the longer horizontal members that will span the distance between the stiles. I have always favoured starting with larger beams, cutting them down to size as needed. The reason is simple. Larger beams often yield better wood, their grain purer and their knots fewer. As I cut the beams to the correct dimensions, I see this truth confirmed. There are only small knots, and the grain is remarkably homogeneous. The wood, once rough and raw, now lies in a neat stack, each piece ready for the next stage of its transformation. With the pieces cut to size, it is time to bring them into perfect alignment, to mill them into square and true forms. Milling is a process of precision, where every imperfection is planned away, leaving only the clean, sharp lines of the final form. I start by jointing all the pieces, a process that is almost effortless with this soft pine. The wood yields easily to the jointer's blade. requiring only the lightest touch to guide it. Once the edges are jointed, I convert my machine into planar mode, a simple shift that transforms the rough-hewn beams into smooth, square pieces. The chips fly from the planer's mouth, filling the collection bag with a cascade of shavings that almost seem artistic in their swirling patterns. The stack of square pieces grows, each one a testament to the precision of the process. These square cuts are not just about aesthetics. They ensure that the joinery will be easier to cut and fit, with no need to overthink the angles or dimensions. With the milling complete, it is time to prepare the shaper for the joinery, the process by which these beams will be bound together into a single, solid structure. The shaper is a powerful machine, capable of cutting intricate joints with ease, but it requires careful setup to ensure that the wood does not move during the process. Movement would ruin the cut, throwing the entire piece out of alignment, so I take the time to build a jig, a simple tenoning table crafted from plywood and screws, designed to hold the wood steady and secure my hands from harm. The shaper tool is installed, a small cutter that still feels large within the confines of the shaper's frame. Though this machine is modest in size, it is more than capable of the task at hand, and I eagerly anticipate the arrival of its larger counterpart. But for now, this will do. I begin by marking a stile with a marking gauge, tracing a line that will guide the cut. To make the mark more visible, I go over it with a pen, ensuring that I can see exactly where the wood will be removed. Adjusting the height and depth of the cut is a precise process. My goal is to remove a third of the wood from the center of the piece, creating a mortise that is perfectly centered and symmetrical. It does not need to be exactly 1/3, but it must be centered, for balance is key to a strong joint. To achieve this, I cut slightly less than 1/3 from one side, then flip the piece and cut the same amount from the other side, ensuring that the mortise is perfectly aligned. For the depth of the cut, I place an entire beam against the fence of the shaper, adjusting the tool until it reaches the exact size I need. With the settings in place, I make a test cut on a scrap piece of wood, one side, then the other, then the third and fourth sides, until the castle joint emerges perfect in its symmetry. Satisfied with the result, I begin to batch the pieces, cutting each joint with the same careful precision. The work goes quickly now, the rhythm of the machine matching the rhythm of my hands as the pieces accumulate in a growing stack. This process, the transition from handwork to machine work, is what sets the modern craft apart from the old ways. In the past, the bulk of the labour lay in cutting, paring, measuring, and marking by hand. Now, the bulk of the work lies in setting up the machine, in ensuring that every adjustment is precise, every setting exact. Once the machine is tuned, the work itself is almost finished. With the mortises complete, I turn my attention to the tenons. The shaper must be set up again, this time with a tool capable of cutting the entire length of the tenon. This tool is a marvel, allowing me to place it at the end of the spindle's arbor, so that I can cut a tenon longer than the tool itself. The rails are quickly batched, the tenons accumulating on the trestles in a satisfying rhythm. There is a joy in seeing the work progress so swiftly, each piece a step closer to the final assembly. Before I proceed, I do a quick test fit, sliding the tenons into the mortises to ensure a snug fit. The joints hold together with friction alone, tight enough to stay in place, but not so tight that they will resist the addition of glue. Satisfied, I move on to the next step, cutting notches into the tenons to create the three-way castle joints. These notches, though small, are important for the final appearance of the joint. They do not add much strength. The wood could easily be popped out with a finger's pressure, but they create a cleaner, more finished look, and they are far easier to cut than a more complex stair joint. I set the table saw by eye for the side cuts, using a height gauge to set the depth of cut. This level of precision is not strictly necessary. The notch could be recessed, and it would make little difference in terms of strength or appearance, but it is satisfying to know that the cut is perfect. I cut the notches with small passes, taking my time to ensure that each one is clean and accurate. It would be faster with a dado blade, which my saw can accommodate, but the setup for a dado blade is long and tedious and not worth the effort for such a small task. Once again, the notched pieces accumulate on the trestles, each one a small victory, a tangible sign of progress. The next step is to cut notches in the middle of the long rails, a process that is much the same as before, rinse and repeat, as they say. This time, however, I can clamp the rails together, assembling the frame as I go. Once the notches are cut, I use a router plane to clean them up, ensuring that they are perfectly square and ready to receive the final pieces. The router plane is a joy to use, a tool that brings both precision and pleasure to the work. The results are surprisingly accurate, and the act of using the plane itself is a small moment of satisfaction, a reminder of the simple joys of craftsmanship. At last, the time to glue has come. This is always a delicate dance, a race against time as the glue begins to set. There are 16 complex joints to glue at once, and I must work quickly to ensure that everything fits together perfectly. I start by attaching the vertical stiles to the long rails, building the sides of the workbench. The glue swells the wood slightly, making the joints tighter, and I must hammer them a little harder to close the gaps. But overall, the assembly goes smoothly. As soon as the sides are assembled, I lay them on the floor, making it easier to handle the frame. I glue all the castle joints and hammer the top rail into place, repeating the process for the second side. With both sides complete, I close the frame by attaching the end rails, the structure finally taking shape, solid and substantial. The frame is now assembled, but the work is not yet done. I let the glue dry, then turn my attention to the top rails, where I must cut notches to close the 8 inner castle joints. I start by removing material with a saw and chisel, a rough cut that gives me enough space to pass the router bit. The router quickly cleans the notch, leaving a perfect cut ready to receive the final 4 pieces. The installation of these last pieces goes smoothly, and at last I have a full frame, a structure that is sturdy and robust, ready to bear the weight of any task I set before it. Before I turn the frame upside down, I add mobility by installing casters on the base. I pre-drill holes, then screw the casters into the stiles. Though screwing into end grain is not the most robust method, these casters will not face significant lateral forces. They will bear mostly downward weight, making this method sufficient. The frame is long and I do not want it to bend under its own weight, so I opt for 6 casters, with 4 of them lockable for stability. The next step is to cut a sheet of MDF to rough size for the bench top. MDF is not the most beautiful material, but it is practical and will serve its purpose well. The top will see heavy use and will likely need to be replaced eventually, so I prefer something cheap and easily replaceable over a more expensive durable material that would be harder to replace when it inevitably wears out. I have a small vise that I plan to install at the end of the bench, so I double the last rail to provide extra support. I mark the location for a couple of dominoes to ensure perfect alignment, then drill the holes, apply glue, and clamp the pieces together, leaving them to dry. With the top prepared, I screw it to the base frame, avoiding glue so that I can easily replace the top when needed. The edges of the top are oversized, so I clean them up with a router, trimming them to a perfect fit. The final task is to drill regularly spaced holes in the bench top for bench dogs and clamps. To ensure accuracy, I make a jig, a small piece of MDF squared and marked at the corners to ensure proper alignment. I bring the jig to my drill press, creating a template with one large hole for the router copy ring and 3 smaller holes for bench dogs. The first jig proves too large, so I remake it, refining the size until it is just right. With the new jig in hand, I begin drilling one hole after another until a third of the bench top is covered in a grid of holes. The router bit, worn and dirty, leaves burn marks in each hole, a sign that it is time for a replacement. But the holes are drilled, and each one receives a chamfer to make it easier to insert bench dogs and clamps. The router also rounds over the edges of the bench top, giving it a smooth, finished look. A quick sanding smooths out any rough spots, and I finish the workbench with a coat of wax, sealing the wood and giving it a soft, lustrous sheen. Now, as I stand before the finished structure, I feel a sense of satisfaction. The workbench is solid and functional, ready to support all the projects that will follow. Yet it is not entirely complete. I still wish to install the vise, add shelving, perhaps even build drawers to store my tools. But those tasks will have to wait for another day. For now, my attention turns to the next project. My wife has asked for a table and a couple of benches for our outdoor meals, and I already know what my next weekend will hold. The wood is already in the workshop, waiting for the hands of the craftsman to bring it to life. And so, with the workbench complete, I bid you farewell.